With the construction of railroads, a growing number of people moved to the Great Plains. Large property plots were given by the federal government to businesses prepared to build railroads through the West between 1850 and 1871. From Sacramento, California, the Central Pacific Corporation started building railroads in the East in 1867. From Omaha, Nebraska, another railroad corporation, the Union Pacific, started building tracks in the West. African Americans, Irish, Chinese, and Mexican Americans performed the majority of the work. The two routes converged in Utah in 1869. The first Transcontinental Railroad in America was completed. Some of the railroad company's land was offered for cheap to settlers who wanted to farm it. Even people from Europe were hired by some businesses to occupy the region. In addition, the Homestead Act of 1862 was drawing more and more people. The government provided 160 acres of free land under this law to anyone who would construct a residence, make improvements, and farm the property for 5 years. More than 600,000 homesteaders had taken up residence in the Great Plains by 1900 under this unclaimed territory. Exodusters were a group of a few thousand settlers. They were African Americans who relocated to Kansas from the South following Reconstruction. African Americans were able to purchase their own land and establish new lives in the West thanks to the Homestead Act. However, the law didn't always operate as intended by the government. The households for whom the land was meant only settled around 10% of the total area. The remaining was mostly grabbed by miners and cattlemen. To encourage people to live in the West, the government kept enacting new laws. Oklahoma gave out a significant amount of territory in 1889. As a result, 2 million acres were claimed by thousands of settlers in less than 24 hours. The government took measurement to protect some wilderness as more and more settlers ate away territory in the West. Government property was set aside in Wyoming in 1872 to build Yellowstone National Park. Later, millions of additional acres were set aside. West of the Mississippi River, people increased from 1% of the country's population to roughly 30% between 1850 and 1900. The difficulties these settlers faced included blizzards, heat, tornadoes, and the threat of raids by renegades and Native Americans. The Great Plains did not have many trees. People created soddies as a result. These houses were made of sod or dug into the sides of hills. In the winter and summer, a soddy was warm. It provided little air or light, though. Most homesteaders lived apart from one another. Almost everything they needed had to be made by themselves. Alongside men, women labored in the fields. 50 years before the 19th Amendment, which granted the right for all women to vote, was ratified, these rights were established. In the West, women were permitted to vote and run for office. The Great Plains were challenging to farm. However, a number of innovations made the job easier. The hard dirt of the prairie was loosened by the steel plow. Wheat was cut more quickly by a new reaper. Other innovations enabled farmers to work more efficiently and quickly. More grain is now available to more people thanks to these innovations. The government supported efforts to advance farming practices. The establishment of agricultural colleges was aided by the Morrill Act of 1862 and 1890. On the Great Plains, the government also built experimentation facilities. There, scientists created novel crop varieties and cultivating methods. Farmers frequently struggled with seasonal dry spells and prolonged droughts. Thus, many learned how to grow crops using dry farming techniques. The plains prospered as a result of these concepts. Farmers frequently accumulated debt in order to purchase all of the new farming equipment. Farmers lost money as a result of falling crop prices, making it impossible for them to pay back their loans. They frequently had to grow more crops in order to earn more money. Consequently, bonanza farms grew in number. These were enormous monoculture farms. The typical farmer had close to 150 acres under cultivation by 1900. However, many bonanza farms failed when a drought struck the plains between 1885 and 1890. They were unable to compete with the smaller farmers who were more adaptive with their crop choices. The exorbitant cost of delivering farmers' crops further increased their debt.